to know what are the sounds that are more problematic for children who are 3 to 5, who are in this preschool age. Being aware of that, and then we'll talk about with the next stage what you might be expecting. So what about language development ages 6 through adolescence? So we're really in that final phase looking at childhood language development from first grade through essentially high school and early college. So that emergent literacy is really talking about those literacy-related skills that are acquired before reading. What are examples of emergent literacy, everybody? See if you can annotate that in this video. What about figurative language? This is something that is developing during this age range. And they include things like dual function words, like one can be cold, like shiver cold, or boy, that was cold, what she said to that other person. That was a really harsh or, not very nice way, mean way to respond. That was cold, right? So that's a dual function word. Then there's a metaphor, okay? Metaphor is to say, she was a spring summer day, she was a shining light, we're talking about someone in a figurative way. Simile is very similar to metaphor, but you're usually saying she is like a summer day. She is that it was as if they were performing as, and so for me to know what a simile is, usually we're saying like or as in the figurative language. And then a proverb is going to use figurative language, usually some kind of moral lesson, like to say, I think, might be say something like, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Someone could think of that very literally, like, oh, I should be eating an apple every day, but as a proverb, it may mean eating plant-based foods is a way to stay healthy. Okay. Trying to think of, I think a common one is a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Like, if I could have less, but I possess it, it's better than considering the 2 that are out of reach. So that would be an example of figurative language in the form of a proverb. And really the ability to develop figurative language, it goes up through, upper adolescence, even into early college years. And as I've told you, the example of pulling out all the stops, I didn't learn that one until I was a senior in college. I was using it, and I knew what it meant, but I didn't know where it came from. So that can make life kind of interesting. And just to be, I think I made this point before, but figurative language is very culturally sensitive. And so therefore, you may be able to use figurative language in one language, but it doesn't translate to another language. So your bilingual or multilingual students may struggle with figurative language more than your monolingual students who speak the same language as the mainstream classroom English. Then we get into sentence types, and we have these 3 or 4 types: simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. So a simple sentence essentially has, it's a subject, the verb, maybe an object, but a compound sentence will take perhaps 2 simple sentences and conjoin them with something like and or but. okay, with a conjunction. So there was an example that, if I said, I like to eat apples and oranges, that isn't a compound sentence. That is still a simple sentence. I have used the conjunction and, however, apples, I like to eat apples, and then tacking on and oranges. Oranges is not a complete, is not a clause. It is not an independent clause that could stand on its own. So if I said, I like to eat apples and then I like to eat oranges, that would be a compound sentence. Complex sentences have embedded clauses. So you might say, I like to eat apples that are red delicious only, so that are red delicious. I'm adding a subordinate clause that is not going to stand alone as a sentence, as a way to define or modify what I said when I said apples. Or I could say, my mother, who is a person who loves to garden, hasn't started planting her garden yet. That would be an example of a complex sentence, because that little who loves to garden, that little, I couldn't say that as a separate sentence. Like, who loves to garden is not an independent clause, but I've put in a dependent clause in the middle of that sentence to tell you a little bit more about the subject of the sentence, my mother. And then there's compound complex sentences where we have both. I could say, my mother, who loves to garden, hasn't started planting her garden, but has started planning what she wants to plant. That would be a combination, because my first sentence had a subordinate clause when I said, who loves to garden? But then I added but, the conjunction, and another independent clause. She has started thinking or planning the garden. Now for inflectional morphemes. So again, when we get to this stage, we're starting to see these individuals, children, using inflectional morphemes. So past tense ed, plural s. We may have seen some of these before age 6, of course. We would see typically like plural s and past tense ed. In fact, you might even hear children, especially before this age, say, I run to the store. So they're over generalizing or over regularizing and not using the irregular past tense ran. That's actually not terrible to see in a very young child, because it shows they know these rules, that you do need to add these endings. But of course, we want to see them start to understand and use irregular forms of plurals and past tense. And then we have the derivational morphemes, where we change the part of speech of the word. So vacate becomes vacation. So we took the word vacate, which was a verb, and we changed it to the noun vacation. That is a derivational morpheme. There are transformations that occur when we use especially derivational morphemes. It's important to recognize that children are having to navigate not only orthographic changes, so spelling changes. So beauty became beautiful. We had to drop the Y orthographically and add the I. Now, some people may say that there's not a phonological change, that they go from beauty to beautiful, but I don't say beautiful, I say beautiful. So actually the vowel changes, and I would say that transformation from beauty to beautiful involves both phonological and orthographic change. On another point, speaking of phonological, when we talk about speech sound development, it's during this phase of development that speech sound development should be plateauing or coming to a level of mastery. So really, usually around 7 or 8 years of age, certainly before they start middle school. Uh, we should see that children produce sounds typically, that they are not demonstrating errors anymore. And this little moment, little soapbox plea, that if you are working in a school and you see middle schoolers who still haven't acquired their sounds and they're in the regular education environment, please, please consider reaching out to the speech language pathologist. I was talking to a friend of mine who's working in the schools, and she said a lot of times the teachers, the people don't realize that errors are going on. So certainly if you have a kindergartner who doesn't have an R, that is not groundbreaking. A lot of them don't have R. But if you have a sixth grader who doesn't have R, that's something that we need to bring to the attention of the speech language pathologist so that that can be addressed. What is the language learning shift in third, fourth grade? What is happening with language and reading at third or fourth grade, everybody? How is the child's relationship to literacy changing? And we've said this many times, but I want you to think about it and put that in the annotation. So then we have our topic of supporting literacy. What are some of the topics or areas that you all may want to put a little bit more focus on as you prepare for the exam? This is just based on areas that were a little harder for everyone, a majority of students in the quizzes. So affixes, these are the little endings or beginnings that we've added to words. We've given some examples on the prior page, but remember again the derivational or inflectional affixes. So children have to learn how to make these transformations between different types of words in their spelling, and learning things like, you know what, we always add an S to, almost always add an S to our plurals, even though they're pronounced with a Z. So if I say scissors, I'm going to add an S to show plurality, even though I'm actually producing a Z. A morpheme category, another distinction is a bound morpheme versus an unbound morpheme. So when I say walked, I have added the bound morpheme ed, okay? But if I say walk, that is a morpheme too, but it can be unbound. It does not need to be attached to another morpheme to be used. But that ed, it can't be used by itself, so it is considered a bound morpheme. How do you know when your students have potential for difficulty with literacy? So the good news is you do have some testing, things like the DIBELS that are used in the schools. I would say if you have poor phonological awareness, especially in early grades, if the children in kindergarten cannot rhyme, they cannot do alliteration, okay? These are signs that there is a very dark literacy cloud on the horizon, and this needs to be addressed very, very soon so that we can improve their literacy skills. The supporting literacy chapter also talks about what we expect at different ages. And so knowing those expectations, when you see a child who cannot do these things, this is an absolute warning sign. I worked with a student who was a freshman in high school who could not rhyme. And it was heartbreaking to me because it was evident that this had not been identified very well. And so this is a really basic phonological awareness skill that is a building block for learning to read and write.